Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar presented by the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning at the University of Melbourne. The University of Melbourne acknowledges the traditional owners of the unceded land on which we work and learn, the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung and Bunurong people, the Yorta Nation and the Dja Dja Wurrung people. We pay respect to the elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to pay my respects to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today. The topic of today's webinar is very topical, and it is build to rent. Is this a solution for unaffordable housing in Australia? My name is Peter Holland. I'm a special advisor to Sistri, the offshore consulting arm of Urbis, and I am a graduate many years ago from Melbourne University, and also I sit at the moment on the Property Advisory Board for the faculty. There'll be time at the end of this event to take some questions, so please feel free to submit questions using the Q&A window. We're very privileged today to have 4 excellent panelists coming from both academia and industry, and the 4 panelists are, firstly, Dr. Jyoti Shukla from the University of Melbourne, Christian Graham from Home Apartments, Neva from Altis Property Partners, and finally, Josh Carney from Salta Properties. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give a presentation, giving their perspective on BTR to start with, and they'll also introduce themselves far better than I could. And then we'll follow that up with a general discussion on some of the key issues surrounding BTR. Then finally, we'll finish up with a Q&A session. So, Jyoti, I'm going to hand it off to you to get the ball rolling. Could you please give some of the insights from your research onto BTR, and particularly where it sits within the overall Australian housing offering? Jyoti.
Thank you, Peter. My name is Jyoti Shukla. I'm a senior lecturer in property at the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning at the University of Melbourne. Most of my research lies in the area of housing and land economics, and these are very interrelated areas, as we will discuss today. And one of my most recent work, which was funded by the Australian Property Institute, looks into the question which Peter just introduced us to, which is, can BTR serve as a solution to unaffordable housing in Australia? And further to that, can land assembling strategies play an important role in making it more affordable? I would like to paint a broad brush picture of the housing market in Australia as it looks today, which is very acute pressure in the housing market, and most of the Australians are finding it difficult to afford housing, both rental and ownership. Specifically focusing on ownership, the rates have drifted down over several decades, and most affected group is the age bracket between 25 years and 49 years. Reduction in ownership means there will be an increase in the rate of renters or households who rent. And we observed that this rate has increased from 1/4 in 1990s to almost 1/3 households who are now renting. Not to forget, there is a huge homeless population, which is not even in the housing market, let alone ownership or rent. Focusing specifically on the rental housing crisis in Australia currently, the vacancy rates are at a record low of 0.9%, while the rents are increasing as high as 10.2% per annum over past 12 months in the capital cities and 9.7% in regions. This means rental housing is also becoming more and more unaffordable. However, the picture is not as grim, and the market is correcting itself, and we are expecting the supply to overtake the population growth rate in the coming 3 years, as has been the trend before the GFC. So what does this mean is a downward pressure on the housing cost, both rent and ownership cost of housing. I have been mentioning rent and ownership because we all understand that housing functions and needs of a household are met either by owning the house or by renting the house. And where does build to rent housing fit in this overall offering is in the rental category. While ownership meets the investment and shelter security requirements of a household and is provided mostly by the private sector, the rental requirements look into the most necessary need of shelter security. And therefore, it's jointly provided by the private sector as well as the public sector, given that many are unable to afford even shelter security for themselves, and the role of public sector becomes important. The private sector currently in Australia is predominantly held by the small landlords. Where BTR fits is the big landlord category, where investors play a very crucial role in funding the projects. And we will discuss the characteristics of build-to-rent housing once we understand what are the challenges with the existing traditional format of private rental housing dominated by small landlords. The first and foremost problem is that it is disorganized, being constituted by small fragmented groups of landlords, most of them who own one property, and around 18% own two properties, not more than that. Length of tenancies are short. So looking at it from the tenant's perspective or renter's perspective, they don't have the shelter security as evident and as clearly stated as it should be when it comes to short tenancies, and no-fault evictions are common, thus putting the shelter security to threat further. Poor quality of housing stock and delays and ignorance of issues of maintenance and repair are commonly reported problems in the private rental sector. Looking at affordability, because of which the public sector comes into play in the rental housing market, unaffordability has been a problem irrespective, and around 42% of all low-income households in Australia have been under rental stress, which means that they have been paying more than 30% of their income as housing cost. And if we focus only on the private rental market, the percentage of households who cannot afford housing in the low-income segment is 58, which is very high. Coming back to the question, how can build-to-rent provide a solution, or at all, can build-to-rent provide a solution to unaffordable rental housing in Australia? So then we want to understand what are the characteristics of this build-to-rent segment as of now. So the RICS defines it as a large-scale or at least minimum 50 dwelling-based kind of project, which means it leverages from economies of scale of production of housing. It is usually held under a unified ownership in the long term. This overcomes slightly the problem of fragmented small-scale ownership of housing, which is the typical characteristic of the private rental housing market in Australia currently. Looking at it from the tenant's perspective, build-to-rent provides opportunity for long-term assured rental tenancies, thus guaranteeing shelter security. And also, BTR is designed and built with facilities and amenities that are good quality and all are managed under single entity with potentially on-site presence. So this improves the quality of the product in the rental market when compared with the standard traditional private rental market. Now, returning to the question whether it can provide a solution to unaffordable rental housing market, just 2 years ago, the opinion was it can't, because mostly build-to-rent housing in Australia is seen as a premium product and not as a pathway to solve affordable housing shortage. However, now the discussion on acknowledging BTR as an opportunity to provide a solution to discount to market affordable rental home is emerging. And today's webinar will discuss more on that. With that, I'll pass it back to Peter.
Thanks, Jyoti. That was a very good summary of how it all fits into the market overall. And look, we're going to now talk, Christian's going to give a little bit of a rundown of home apartments and what they've been doing over the recent years. They're one of the early adopters and pioneers in this field. So, Christian.
Okay, hopefully you can see my share screen. Thanks very much, Peter and Jyoti. Great to be with you here today. Home is a group of very talented people from the property, hotels, student accommodation, retail and other areas that have come together to form a build-to-rent platform. I'm just lucky enough to be the spokesperson for that very talented team today. So really glad to be with you and talking about a topic that I'm very passionate about. We're a private Australian creator and operator of apartment communities exclusively for renters. And we're a full service brand that's focused on BTR. So we don't do for sale sometimes, we're solely focused on the rental segment. And whilst we were pioneers in this space in 2017, we still feel that we're learning every day, and there really are no experts in this space. It's very early days for build to rent in Australia. To give you a feel for the types of communities that we create, this is some of our current workbook. South Bank and Richmond buildings in Melbourne are now open and leasing up. They were finished in April and July respectively, so they're in the middle of lease up. The Docklands and Parramatta are what we call Generation 2. So those two properties are under construction and will both open in early 2024. And then we've got projects that are about to go into construction in St Leonard's and St Peter's in Sydney, and then a further two that are in the pre-application stage. Properties that you see on the screen range between 200 apartments and 700. So there's a certain amount of scale to all of them. Often they'll have mixed use elements. So they could have anything from a couple of retail shops through to 5,000 or 10,000 square metres of office, and in the case of Richmond, a 10,000 square metre neighbourhood shopping centre. So there can be a mixed use element to them, which can be very important from a town centre and urban regeneration point of view. And then there are some key worker housing elements included in some of those buildings as well, but no social housing. So our mission is to reinvent renting for our customers. And that's been a really important part of what we've been doing over the last 12 months. Build to rent is a very new sector, and our South Bank project and our Richmond project were the first and second BTR buildings to be opened in Melbourne respectively. So large part of the task has been introducing the concept of build to rent to the community. And I think that's something that will continue for the industry for the next couple of years. So welcome home. Our buildings feel like a long stay hotel. You can stay in our buildings for anything from 6 months to 6 years. Our buildings have full service, so resident services, concierge, handyman and the like. World-class amenities of the likes that you can see on the screen there, the pools, the gyms, the co-working hubs, private dining rooms and so forth. And then on top of that, signature services that bring those spaces to life. So the personal trainers, the dog walkers, the room cleaning and so forth. So we studied the best examples of build to rent or multifamily around the world when we set out our brief. Then we brought them back to Australia and put an Australian lens on them, because at the end of the day, we're designing for Australian customers and we're designing for Australian lifestyles. And that's very important from our perspective. Maybe most importantly, we place a huge emphasis on community, as do our residents. So we have a community and events manager that works across our South Bank and Richmond building. They look after our events program, all of our social side of things, and that could be anything from group exercise classes to resident drinks to TV nights, could be Soccer World Cup night, could be House of the Dragons night. But that aspect of community is very important to us, and we see that as a huge differentiating factor between build to rent and other forms of residential. So who are our residents so far, as we're about 6 months into operation of South Bank and Richmond? On the whole, they're about 75% under 40 years of age. About 50% of them come from nearby or within 5 Ks, 60% couples, and about 35% have pets. I don't think that tells you very much, except to say that they tend to be on the younger side. I think what it really tells you is that there's actually quite a diverse range of people that live in these buildings. There's certainly not the very narrow band of millennial renters pre-kids that is talked about in most of the industry publications. It's a much wider range of people. But the one thing that is common to them all from our experience has been that they are renting by choice, and they've been attracted to our buildings because they want to live in something better, not because they want to live in build to rent. And so I think that point is important, because as I think you'll hear today, there's no one right version of build to rent. Home is a full service offering at the premium end, unashamedly. But I think that in time you will see this segment into many different types of offerings, and that could include mixed tenure and other forms of build to rent, different product mixes, smaller, larger, different segments, maybe some catering for a much older demographic, even potentially retirees. I think that segmentation is really important, and I also think it's going to be very exciting from an innovation point of view. All of Home's buildings are very sustainable. They aim for 5-star, Green Star and net zero in operation right across our portfolio. And whilst we've placed particular emphasis on this, I don't think that we're alone in pushing in that direction. I think most of the Australian build-to-rent sector has been very progressive on the ESG front, and I think that that will continue to. At the end of the day, it's still very early days for the build-to-rent sector in Australia. The first couple of buildings that have been finished I really regard as a set of pilot projects, and I think the segmentation that I talked about earlier will come as we see the customer response to build-to-rent as a product category. There's absolutely no reason why Australia can't be regarded as one of the best markets or sources of innovation for BTR anywhere in the world. And whilst I don't think that BTR replaces home ownership, I really do think that it can provide another source of good quality housing at scale. If you want to learn more about Home, our website is homeapartments.com.au. And if you want to be involved with industry bodies, the Property Council is probably the central point where the industry comes together as a community. Thank you, and I look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Excellent. Thank you indeed, Christian. We're going to go now from a slightly different perspective, coming from Neva, from Altis Property, which also really talks about institutional interest in investing in this sector. So Neva, over to you.
Thank you, Peter, and thanks, Christian and Jyoti. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. My name's Neva Courts, and I'm the Director of Real Estate for Altis Property Partners. Altis is the partner of Aware Super. We have been manager on behalf of Aware Super and its previous guys as First State Super for over 10 years, and just over 12 months ago we formed a partnership and branded that as Aware Real Estate, which you may have seen out and about. Aware's really striving to bring risk-adjusted returns to members, and we have over 1 million members and the third largest domestic super fund with assets under management of about 155 billion. Altis Property Partners brings the development, asset management, acquisition expertise, and we're a small team of 45 professionals. In terms of the investment strategy, domestically investing in direct real estate on behalf of Aware, we're focused across a number of sectors, particularly the industrial and logistics, the living sector, which includes build to rent and mixed use. As I said, we're looking to achieve risk-adjusted returns through development and investment over the long term. And we look at a whole lot of flexible structures in terms of development, investment and partnering. In terms of the portfolio, across the sectors, we have stabilised assets valued at about 1.7 billion across the country, across those sectors. And we have a further development pipeline, particularly across industrial and the build to rent space, of a further 2.3 billion, with ambitions to grow to 7 billion in the next 5 years. In terms of the residential portfolio, we have just over 500 units operational already and another 1,600 in various stages of development. Now, those are a mixture of private rental and also essential worker discounted rents. In terms of our program for essential workers, it's really, as Jyoti alluded to in her presentation, about enabling essential workers to live closer to work and find affordable housing solutions for them. So these apartments are priced at 80% of market rent, and we have a mixture of 1, 2 and 3 bedroom product across the portfolio in a variety of boutique and larger developments. Importantly, it's not essential for occupiers to be members of Aware Real Estate, but our policy does focus on the essential worker categories around aged care, healthcare, education, law enforcement, emergency services and childcare. And it does require occupiers to be actively working in frontline service or in adjacent support roles. And we have a series of thresholds in terms of income under our policy, depending on the household type. We assess that annually as well in terms of continuing eligibility under the program. Just to give you a bit of a highlight around some of the projects that we have at various stages of development. Here in Victoria, we have 2 projects that are currently in planning, just over 350 apartments at Queen's Road, opposite Albert Park, which is in the Alfred Hospital catchment. And in Preston, in the southern part of Preston, we're really seeing significant growth and demand from essential workers in that Brunswick, Northcote, Thornbury precinct. And we saw this as an extension of that area and seeing some significant gentrification through there. Again, another 230 apartments, including a little bit of townhouse product as well in this location. And both of these projects are expected to be completed around 2025. We have brought online recently 100 apartments in the paper mill development at Alphington. This is interesting in that we purchased this under an off-the-plan structure and bought 100 apartments out of about 300 in the whole development. That enabled the developer to progress and commence construction probably 2 years ahead of where it would have otherwise happened in a traditional build-to-sell type structure. And I'm pleased to say that we've leased more or less all of those apartments within a 3-month window, and 100% of those to essential workers under our EWA program. This example in Miranda in the Sutherland Shire in New South Wales, we actually developed 2 towers here, one for the purpose of affordable housing or build to rent for essential workers, and the other is a build to sell product. And we've successfully sold all of those apartments down prior to practical completion. And then lastly, we've got a number of mixed use developments in the pipeline. We just received DA approval earlier this year for this mixed use project at Liverpool. As Christian alluded to, we've incorporated here about 8,000 metres of office and some retail into this project, as well as 300 odd apartments. And we also have a project in St Leonard's in that Royal North Shore Hospital precinct, again, a focus on apartments, but also some additional areas, childcare, community areas, etc. Just lastly, I'll touch on ESG and sustainability. As Christian also alluded to, it is really important for most developers and investors these days, and we're very much focused around the affordable proposal for essential workers who make up the majority of the WARE Super member cohort. But we're also very much focused on sustainability initiatives, solar panels, and tying in initiatives into our project. At the end of the day, we're a long-term owner and we want to make sure we have quality product that is sustainable. Thank you, Peter. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Neva. You're obviously full bottle on this sector, and we'll come back to this later as in terms of the emerging nature of this sector in real estate overall. But look, last of all, in terms of the presentations, we've got Josh from Salta. So Josh, take it away.
Okay, so I'm sharing screen. Hopefully that's coming through. My name is Joshua Carney. I'm the head of build-to-rent operations at Salta Properties. Salta Properties is a multifaceted property business with more than 50 years experience, including residential, commercial, industrial, and hotels. I worked in USA multifamily, what we're calling build to rent in Australia, for more than 15 years on the investment, development, and operations side, and managing more than 5,000 build to rent residents. I also had both good and absolutely atrocious experience as a build to rent resident while living in New York City. At Salta, my role is quite broad, working with our very hard working and exceptional development and investment teams, but ultimately I'm responsible for the operations platform of our build to rent pipeline, which currently stands at approximately 3,500 units. Now, I wanted to provide some insight into build to rent or multifamily on a global scale. The same factors that are driving build to rent in Australia are driving multifamily globally. Urbanisation, housing unaffordability, limited new housing supply, strong household formation, and demand for housing flexibility. Residents are either renting because of necessity or preference. What we are seeing in Australia is not just a national, but a global shift in how we live. Globally, capital, given the current economic environment, is flying to high quality multifamily assets and operators. In the UK, the build-to-rent pipeline has swelled to 200,000 units in just 8 years. 50% of this pipeline is outside of London. The sector has massive potential in the Asia Pacific. Global capital is very hungry for resilient income streams and is looking for APAC exposure to living sectors. And in the US, we're seeing very high rent growth and very tight rental markets. Pre-pandemic, it was all about the urban markets, the gateway cities. During the pandemic, suburban multifamily outperformed, and now post-pandemic, urban markets are once again the place to be. Now, the figure on the right highlights the opportunity for build-to-rent housing in Melbourne and also nationally in Australia. The dark blue dots at the top of the graph represent the percentage of renters in various US, UK, and Australian cities. And the blue bars represent the number of completed build-to-rent dwellings. So on the far left, we have various US cities, and on the far right, we have Melbourne, with more than 30% of the population renting, and yet only 1,000 odd completed build-to-rent apartments. I'll provide some insight into Salta's build-to-rent platform. So we're setting out to reshape the future of our precincts and cities by becoming the catalyst for change in the rental industry. We see a future where conversations about leading a happier life are at the core of the homes that we create, where people want to rent in places that help them thrive in their everyday, where their needs are placed at the heart of what we offer. Now, the Salta build-to-rent model combines design-driven apartments purpose-built for renters with exceptional curated lifestyle amenities and services. Salta is unique in that more than 2/3 of our build-to-rent pipeline is in large mixed-use precincts. This creates a responsibility to not only create high-quality build-to-rent apartments, but also vibrant and energized precincts where people can live, shop, work, and play. This intersection of multiple uses and the organic value that can be created here is very exciting. So our vision is for our residents to experience a better housing model, one that includes on-site friendly and helpful staff, amenities that are activated and homely, and additional services and benefits that you simply cannot access in the private rental market without the red tape. In terms of our development pipeline, we currently have approximately 3,600 units, and we're looking to grow this. This large and consistent delivery program will see an average of 400 units delivered per year from 2024 onwards. This pipeline enables standardization opportunities and efficiencies of scale across development, investment, and operations. Our pilot project is 249 Queens Parade in Fitzroy North. Currently under construction, we're expecting a PC date of Q2 2024. 94 pet-friendly apartments over 14 levels. Amenities and services include on-site staff, multiple roof terraces, a resident lounge, co-working spaces, a full appliance package inside the apartments, and a dedicated pet zone. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Josh. Look, thank you everyone for this. Surprise, surprise, we're running behind, but that's okay, right? It's all these presentations are very, very informative. I've learned lots of new stuff. And, you know, it is a different asset class. And look, we're going to have a few general questions before we get to questions from the floor, but and this discussion, and we'll move along these pretty quickly. Neva, it is an emerging asset class, and it is becoming respectable and respected. Institutional investment is becoming involved. Can you give us a little bit of background about this and how this has evolved and the fact that it's only relatively recent in Australia?
Thanks, Peter. I think as you've seen in the presentations from all of us, it's very much an emerging asset class, but one that there's a lot of passion about and clearly a lot of need in terms of supply. At the end of the day, there's a whole lot of different models and different operators, and we're all learning as we go, both from international experience and what's working locally as well. And really it's about finding the right product in the right market and adapting those different models to what each of the developers and investors are ultimately looking to get out of this product as well, whether that be from a scale perspective, liquidity, returns, etc. Happy for anyone else to jump in here.
Anyone else got any comments on that as an emerging asset class? Okay, we'll move on to one of the key things that comes out of it, which has probably been a blockage towards it becoming a respected asset class, is financial returns and the challenge thereof. Getting BTR to stack has been a challenge. And Jyoti, could you give a little bit of a background on the research that you've undertaken and the results from that and what solutions there might be, please?
Sure, Peter, and I'll take the discussion forward from where Neva left about institutional investors, because that is very crucial to the financial feasibility of a BTR, especially if we are talking about making it affordable. So there are a few challenges to making BTR financially more viable, relating to the tax regime in Australia, given that it's a new product which the market is not yet tuned to receive, the planning regulations which need to adjust to facilitate BTR better, and above all, the institutional investment. How can we make BTR more attractive for institutional investors, given that there is very little track record, if at all, of the performance of this new emerging asset class? However, in our research, we assumed that the risk level of BTR for an investor is relatively low, because BTR product doesn't depend on off-the-plan purchase upfront, and rather depends on a stable rental revenue spreading over time, which reduces the risk level. And given the stability it offers, we are betting on, we are assuming that investors, especially long-term investors like pension funds and superannuation, will assume lower returns. And with that assumption, I would like to present the numbers that we got. So it is a dense slide, but I'll request the focus on the graph itself. Assuming a base case, a very simple base case scenario, where let's say the product mix is 70% studio plus 1-bed housing, 25% 2-bed units, and 5% 3-bed units, and a median market rent. We understand that BTR is currently operating at 25% above the market rent, which generates greater or returns comparable to BTS. But if we lower our expectations, given that we are assuming BTR to be a lower risk product, we assume median rent as our base case. So we get a return or IRR of 7.91, round figure 8%. Now to this, if we keep changing and we tested this base case for different scenario. Few scenarios relate to revenue increase, like for example, how can we mix 1, 2, 3-bed and studio to increase the return? And we found that 3-bed units and studios generate the highest revenue. So probably the focus can be a little bit more on these. If we increase the building efficiency from 70% to say 80%, then our returns increase from 8% to 8.53%. There are few cost levers that we can play around with, especially land cost. And this is where I would want to draw the focus of everyone. Now, the land cost, if changed from costing to leasing model, significantly improves the return from 8% to 9.3%. Also, if we assume BTR to be a product comparable to affordable housing, if we enter that segment using BTR model, then we can assume a case of no land tax. At the moment, Victoria and New South Wales have already reduced the land tax to 50%, but assuming a case of no land tax, the IRRs increase from 8% to 9.51%. A no GST scenario will further improve it to 9.81%. And thinking about parking requirements, which is a much discussed topic among industry experts, and I'm sure that experts here, Christian, Joshua, and Neva will have something to say on this as well. If we assume no parking requirements from BTR, then that is where we get the most return. So with that, I'll leave the floor open for other questions and others to contribute.
Excellent. Christian, you've already talked about the fact that that's early days with BTR in Australia and you're learning as you go. Tell us what are some of the key lessons that you've learned today, things that have worked or things that haven't worked, just some of them, highlight.
Yeah, I think overall the proof of concept, if you like, as to whether or not a customer will come and buy into the idea of, more security of tenure, attraction to the amenity spaces and potentially to the services as well. I think that's well and truly now covered. And if you went back 18 months ago, maybe even less, there would have still been a question about whether or not there was genuinely proof of concept. But I think that's now done. And I think that's been done in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, and Perth. So I think it's not like it worked in Sydney, will it work at other places? I think that's now done. And that's been done at, buildings of anything from 70 units in Perth to 1,250 units on the Northern Gold Coast. So I think the proof of concept bit's done. A few people have said in different ways, there's no one type of BTR. It's not a generic thing. And I think that's probably, one of the most important points, because you are really adapting to local conditions. Like, who's the customer in that catchment? What do they want? Are they younger? Are they older? Are there other things? Like, is there a swimming pool already, adjacent to your site? So those sorts of things become really important. There's a local context to it, but you want to stay flexible. You want to incorporate a level of flexibility into these buildings because you're going to own them for a long time. Also means you can't build them cheaply, and so that's and I thought Jyoti's slide was fantastic, but some of the considerations in those things, in the list, you do have this longevity and durability point that you need to kind of always have in the front of mind, and what's it going to cost me from a capital point of view when I develop it, to what's it going to cost me from an operational point of view when I'm operating this building. And there's trade-offs. So you want some flexibility. You got to have regard to the operating cost of the building, the back of house, and utility areas like loading and parcels and unsexy bits, if you like, are just as important as the attractive bits in the lobby and the gym and all those sorts of things. So you've got to have an eye on both those things. And I think then, back to the start again, we're all learning. Never think that you know it all. Like, this will change and evolve over time, and it's all in the detail. So you got to be poring over the detail, watching what's happening, watching what's changing. Anything from, you can build. The day you open the building, you're already thinking about what's the changes that I need to make in 6 months, 12 months, 24 months to keep this building right, and also right for the residents that I've got at a point in time as well. So it's just this continuing learning and changing to meet the needs of your residents.
So Josh, I know you've just done a massive study tour, plus you've worked in the US in multifamily, or BTO as we call it. Give us some examples of some lessons there, because that's a pretty mature market, particularly US and Europe. So there's a lot of experience in BTR, multifamily housing. What are some of the key lessons from your perspective that are applicable to our market?
Certainly. Thank you, Peter. And just to expand on your comment regarding the US, so the US is the world's largest and most mature multifamily market, where 10% of the population, or roughly 37 million people, reside in over 20 million multifamily rental units. It obviously took the US a very long time to get to that stage, but it is a very big asset class in the US and in other parts of the world. And it's exciting to think that we're literally just getting going in Australia. Now, given that a picture can mean 1,000 words, I just wanted to share some images of some of the built-to-rent assets that we were fortunate to tour in a recent USA study trip. So the top left, we have Hudson Yards, which is a big mixed-use precinct in Manhattan. Number 2 is 8 Spruce Street, which is a multifamily building that was designed by Frank Gehry. Number 3, VR 57 West, which is a Bark Ingalls multifamily asset, also in Manhattan. Number 4 is a fascinating asset, Stuytown. This is the largest multifamily asset in the US, with 11,000 units in 56 buildings across 80 acres in Manhattan's East Village. More than 27,000 people call Stuytown home. Number 5 and 6 in the bottom left, this is the Set, which is a new multi-family hotel model that's only recently opened. Number 7 is another mixed-use precinct in downtown Los Angeles. And 8, 9, and 10, this is one of the newest, high-quality multifamily assets in New York City. Now, I wanted to share these because I'm hoping that it highlights the very diverse range that multifamily assets can take. Urban, suburban, low, medium, and high density, mixed-use precincts versus standalone, low, mid-range, and premium pricing, small, medium, or large apartment and project sizes, furnished versus unfurnished, and of course, residents of, varying ages and backgrounds. The list is literally endless. And to run with, Christian's comment earlier, build to rent is not one specific thing, and it's never done in one right way. There are so many different ways to look at the problem. With 20 million multifamily units in the US, the variety of residents and assets across the space and across different locations and submarkets is astonishing. But if I was to, highlight some key lessons learned over the years in the US and ones that we certainly need to apply in Australia, it's to remain firmly focused on our residents' needs and wants. We are a customer-focused proposition. To have strong customer service, the importance and subtleties surrounding curated community, the necessity to integrate your development, investment, and operations. The technology is constantly changing and reshaping the asset class. The tidal wave of capital that's chasing exposure to quality built-to-rent assets. And to reiterate another comment that Christian made earlier, it's certainly to remain curious, to learn every day, and to continually improve our offering to all parties. And I think the key, one of the key messages I'd like to mention today is I think we have a real opportunity to provide high quality residential housing on a global scale in Australia by combining high quality product, which we already do very well. Facilities management and customer service and operations, we can really set a new benchmark for multifamily globally here in Australia in our big cities.
Excellent, Josh. We've got two more quick discussion questions to address before we go to the floor, the Q&A. But generally, this goes to the panel. I mean, it sounds as if BTR is well accepted by just about everyone as being a good thing for Australia, right? So we get that, right? And it is happening and it's evolving. So what can government do to actually assist in this process? There's been a bit of a reluctance. There's been some government assistance in various ways, but how should they be involved, if and when, and so on at different levels? So anyone can answer this one, please.
I'll kick off. If I was to sum up in one word what the build-to-rent sector needs in Australia, it would be education. Education of our residents, consultants, local councils, the media, and government, all levels of government, local, state, and federal. Now, I think one of the things that I certainly enjoy about build-to-rent at the moment in Australia is it's very collegiate and very collaborative. And I think by, continuing to work together as an industry and as a community, build-to-rent can certainly play its part to make a real difference in delivering much needed housing supply. So I'd answer that question with education.
Excellent. Anyone else? Comments?
I'll chip in a bit. I think one big difference we observe in the American market as opposed to the Australian market when it comes to leveraging from BTR as an affordable option is that we are not seeing financial support from the government, whether it is in the form of tax exemptions, whether it is in the form of regulatory exemptions, and most importantly, the support in the form of government guarantee. Like, for example, we know the affordable housing bond aggregator is the newest thing in the facilitation of affordable housing, but it is only catering to not for profit and public housing sector and community housing providers, but not inviting or engaging with the private sector to intervene into that sector. I think that's a big thing that government should be considering.
Okay, Christian?
I agree. I just wanted to add, I think Jyoti makes a really good point. I think if you could say one thing to government, whether that's federal, state or local, you'd probably be trying to say, engage with the industry to try and understand each other's objectives and try and solve the need. I think that we've got a lot better chance of delivering, good quality housing at volume right across Australia if the objective is really clear and you're working together to try and achieve it. The other thing I'd say is, at the end of the day, BTR is not really about property development. The only reason any property development is happening is because there's no assets for the capital to buy. The development is just a means to an end to create the asset that the investor is wanting to invest in and then the resident is wanting to live in. So making planning more certain is really important, because institutional capital would not be taking planning risk if it didn't have to, and it doesn't like doing it, frankly. And being very clear and stable with tax settings would also be a positive, because I think that Australia's been a bit guilty of, hopping around a bit on, is it giving incentives now? Is it not? Where is it? Just be really clear about it and put them in place and be stable about it for a while as well. So yeah, back to the original point, I think the most important thing is just for government to engage with the industry and both be working towards some shared objectives.
Okay, moving on to a final question before we go to the floor. And Neva, if you can address this one, and look, what is the potential for BTR to assist government in the National Housing Accord with their target of delivering 1 million homes over that 24-30 period? Does it have a role?
Yeah, it absolutely has a role, and it's really an extension of what we've just been speaking about there, which is there's a lot of ambitions from government to work together with the private sector, and particularly the superannuation sector to solve issues around social and affordable housing. And so it's really important that there is that collaboration structure, and I think we're seeing that with the Accord and the roundtables that have been going on, to put some structure that does have longevity. To Christian's point, these aren't developments that happen overnight. They take a lot of planning and they take a significant amount of investment, and to really be able to leverage off the appetite for that, putting together framework in a collaborative approach is what's going to get the best outcome, both for those in need, and there's clearly a housing need, but also for investors that are looking to get set in the sector.
Any other comments from any of the other panelists on that one?
I think if you're sticking with apartments, I think important bit of context is that in the absence of offshore sales to underpin large apartment tower projects, we are never going to produce the amount of apartment housing supply that we did between 2012 and 2019 or whatever it is. Let's call them the peak years. So we're already in a situation where we're going to find it very difficult to produce housing like we have in the past. There's also far less sites that are available. The cost of money has just gone up over the last 6 months. So I think there's some very, very significant headwinds. And I don't think BTR will solve all of it, but I think it is probably the lowest hanging fruit in terms of generating good quality housing at volume across Australia. As I said, I don't think it will solve all the issues, but I do think it's the lowest hanging fruit, and the government should be doing whatever it can to incentivise as much of it to happen as possible.
Excellent. Look, we're going to move on to questions from the floor, and I apologise for the limited time we have for this, but I'm going to commit to the panelists actually responding individually to some of these questions after the event, right? Because there's some great questions. There's about 30 questions, and some are directly to individual panelists and some are more general, but we will address all of this. But anyway, we've got 10 minutes, so we'll run with all this. First of all, Christian, one question to you was the mix of apartments from your experience. What works best between studios, ones, twos, or does it vary from project to project, market to market? I suppose it does, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, probably one point I would make is in the early days, and this is sort of like, you think of our first buildings as generation 1, future ones generation 2, etc. In the early days, and to the point about capital not wanting to take planning risk that it doesn't have to, or not too much. In Victoria, there was a real aversion to studios. We didn't want to have a head-to-head fight with the planning ministry in Victoria, so we didn't incorporate a lot of studios in our early buildings because we wanted to be able to get on and get going and not spend years in planning panels. I think that what's being demonstrated in the first couple of buildings that have been opened by ourselves and others is there certainly is a market for the studios, and the planning authorities probably need to recognise that. That's at one end of the spectrum. At the other end, a lot of people don't want to do 3 beds because they don't think there's much demand at the 3-bed end. Well, we have a waiting list for 3-bedroom apartments. We've leased out all our 3 beds, and we've got a waiting list now after a couple of months. And we did more than we thought we would need. So, kind of back to one of my earlier points, it is very local, and you do need a diversity of product.
Okay, this is a question, and I'm going to address this to Neva and to Josh. cost of BTR versus BTS and the spec associated with that, there's been one assertion that the quality is often higher and greater, but I'm not so sure on the cost side per unit or per square metre rate. How does it compare from your experience?
It comes down to right product, right location. So in some cases, a BTR product may benchmark to be a higher cost than a equivalent build to sell product in a location, and others it might be similar, and others it might be less. So it really depends on each of the developers and operators as well. In the Aware real estate example, we're actually probably as aligned to a build to sell type product in terms of design and quality as we are to what we might be seeing currently in the market in terms of build to rent. We're not necessarily targeting premium quality, we're targeting high quality for the long term, but not necessarily that premium quality. So the cost will often be very similar, but it comes down to the ability to move forward and build. And so it's not often so much the construction cost, it's a lot of the holding costs and the sales costs and other things that contribute to a build to sell product perhaps being more expensive from that context.
I agree with your great comments, Neva. And it's not only, as you mentioned, the upfront costs, it's also those ongoing running costs. Cost is obviously only one piece of the puzzle. And I think a key point to make is that build to rent is a long-term focused asset as opposed to build to sell, which is obviously more short-term. So we're really looking to develop assets which perform for our residents, and for our capital partners over the long term. So both upfront costs can be very challenging in the build to rent space, given the current GST treatment. To answer a previous question, what could the government do to help build to rent? GST is certainly high on that list, as is MIT withholding tax of foreign investors. But yeah, both the challenging upfront costs, but also the ongoing costs, we obviously pay very close attention to.
Okay, got one long question here, which is a good one, that relates really to the topic very much so. And it says, how does BTR help the housing crisis if the rent is 25% above the general rental market? Now, you can question that, but that's up for your grabs. The individuals who need to avail this sort of housing are the lower socioeconomic demographic and are already struggling to keep up with rental prices and the increasing costs of living. A high quality product like BTR is unlikely to meet the need for this cohort, especially if there is to be an appropriate ROI for investors. So this is, I guess, Neva, more in your line with the work you've done, but all of you, there is reference to key worker housing and affordable housing, and sometimes mixing this with market-related housing. So away you go, please.
Yeah, Peter, as you rightly pointed out, a large component of our investment is in the essential worker affordable space. So we're actually at a significant discount to market rent at 80% of market. So hopefully we're fulfilling a significant need there. Overall, though, build to rent is adding to supply, and as Christian rightly pointed out, build to rent is going to be some of the projects that are really going to add to the pipeline, because there is a lot of headwinds, particularly in that build to sell space. So whilst build to rent is not necessarily the solution for low income earners in terms of accommodation, it does free up other accommodation for others. And that's really what it's about. Is it about bringing more supply? There is a need for it. And as Jyoti showed us in those charts, there is going to be some stabilisation of rents as well. We're going through a period where there's a very, very tight vacancy rate, particularly in the Melbourne market. But that will, like anything, go through cycles. Interestingly, and maybe it's a question for Christian and Josh, it's dangerous just to look at a premium to market rent, because you've got to look at what services are being provided there and how those occupiers offset some of their other costs that wouldn't normally sit in the rent bucket as well.
Yeah, I agree. It doesn't have to be 25% more expensive. It's just the models that you're seeing currently tend to be. I think there's absolutely a version that could come down closer to market rent, and maybe it doesn't have the services and and maybe doesn't have as much on-site staff or quite as much amenity. Maybe it's somewhere between what Assemble do and you know what say we do. But so I think there is a model in there. I also think key worker housing can be incorporated into any form of BTR very, very easily, especially if the owner manager is looking after it as part of the rest of the property. Social housing much more complex to incorporate, but key worker housing is really just a matter of economics. So yeah, I think it could be incorporated.
Okay. Look, we're going to have to finish up here pretty shortly, and I'm just going to open to the floor if there's to the panelists, any final comment you'd like to make before we sign off. Anyone, any final comment?
Peter, I'll just say one last thing, and it's to continue with the conversation we were just having regarding the affordability question. It's an excellent question. If you look at how build to rent has evolved in the UK over the last 10 years, it started in premium London locations at a premium price point. Then it spread to, you know, Manchester and, you know, secondary locations. And then it went to, you know, more regional markets in that, you know, mid and also, you know, that affordable end of the spectrum. So it's natural that the first cabs off the rank here are probably more towards that premium end of the spectrum because they're the only ones that get the numbers to stack up. But as long as we continue to work together, hopefully there's a real solution in here for in terms of affordability.
Thanks, Josh. And look, with relation to the other questions that have come from the floor, we will try to have those answered by the panelists, particularly the ones which are addressed to an individual. But look, this brings us to the end of today's event. And I'd like to offer my thanks to the panel members for providing their insights and expertise and also giving up their time. Thank you also to the alumni, the students and friends for joining us. I hope you found the discussions informative, as certainly I have, and I've certainly learned a lot more about BTR. Please take a moment to complete the short survey. A link will be provided to you. And this survey helps to continue to improve the University of Melbourne's programs and provide meaningful events for alumni. So please join us again for more events in 2023. And in the meantime, I wish you all the best for the festive season. Thank you and goodbye.